So I am so grateful that Sebastian is here to speak to us, and thank you all for being here. So now, please welcome Sebastian Junger.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. My God. You're not supposed to embarrass your speakers that quickly. Come on, wait a little bit. Thank you. I'm really touched, and I'm incredibly touched to be invited back here to this beautiful town. And I think I've had an amazing, varied, complex, interesting life as a journalist. There's a lot of interesting things I could talk about, and I'm happy to. I'll do questions afterwards. But I think, for me, what would be most meaningful is to explain to people, to retell to people the story of how I came here, how I came to this amazing place. I've been told I've affected the town. I think I should tell you guys how the town affected me. It completely altered the course of my life. So in some ways, this next hour or so will be a long thank you to all of you and to this place. Let me see if I can get myself back to 1989. I wasn't even a struggling writer. I think you could already say I was a failing writer. And there was no indication that it was going to change direction. And I was writing some things for the Boston Phoenix and places like that, but I wasn't even close to making an income, that I could live on. And luckily, I was going to say evening, it actually was afternoon. One afternoon, I was sitting in a bar and talking to a guy who happened to be sitting next to me, and he said, "Hey, are you looking for work?" And that was classic afternoon bar talk, right? And I said, "Yeah, why? How could you tell? Because I'm in a bar at 3 in the afternoon? Was that the tip-off?" So he had a tree company. He had a tree removal company, residential tree work. And he would take trees down, or prune trees, take trees down for people, and he needed a climber. And he said, "Listen, I'll teach you to climb if you'll work for me occasionally." I was like, "Well, why occasionally?" He said, "Well, because I don't get that much work. So as long as you don't need full-time work," which explained why he was in the bar at 3 afternoon. If you don't need full-time work, maybe we could get something going, because I need a climber a couple of days a week. So he taught me to climb. I don't know if you've ever seen it done, but basically if you have a big tree in a small space over a house or between houses in a small yard, you need a climber to take it down in pieces. And it's skilled work, and it's dangerous work if you're not skilled. I'll put it that way. And that actually became an important distinction. I had just started doing this amazing work, and I was dating a woman who I'm no longer dating, obviously, but I'm here with my wonderful wife. But this is many decades ago. I was dating a woman, and we were sort of wanting to move out of Boston, and we went to visit friends who had moved to Gloucester, and we drove up on a sort of crisp October evening. And you know the kind of weather, right? It's just sort of the kind of weather where you think, thank God I live in New England. Like, what an amazing place to live. What an amazing time of year to be alive. And we drove up to Gloucester, and days were already starting to get sort of dark a little early. And they lived on Rocky Neck, and a young couple. And we parked, and I couldn't believe, Boston's 45 minutes away. They live in this little apartment, and across the street is a marine railways and all these boats. And I'm just like, wow, this is amazing. What an extraordinary place. And my then girlfriend, Amy, and I just fell in love with it sort of instantly. And so we came back, we just came back and rented an apartment, the second floor of a 3-story building on 44 Eastern Point Road. Which was pretty ramshackle, And the owner, Armand Sindoni, maybe some of you remember Armand, he was like, don't worry, we're going to fix it up. Yeah, someone's laughing. Yeah, don't worry, we're going to fix it up. And in fact, the staircase project, I'm in the middle of the staircase project. We're going to have big stone steps going up the front. And, I'm going to finish that up too. And of course, that didn't happen while we were there. And we lived there for almost 3 years. Now, fast forward to this morning, we drove around and we parked in front of 44 Eastern Point Road. I wanted to show it to my wife, Barbara, and our kids, our little girls. And it was just as ramshackle. I mean, it was exactly the house, and the stairs were still unfinished. And Armand, God bless him, has passed away, so I don't think they ever will be finished. But at any rate, we moved in there, and I was continued doing tree work. I was working sometimes for a landscaping company that I think was called Wolf Hill. Wolf Hill? They're still here? All right. Yeah, I would do their climbing for them. They get a tree, a tree problem that they couldn't deal with, so they'd call me. And so I was trying to be a writer. I was trying to figure out how to make a living as a writer. I didn't want to do tree work my whole life. And I'm going to circle back to this dangerous versus skilled point now. So what I realized about tree work, I mean, I'm not a particularly courageous person. I'm terrified of heights and spiders, by the way. The two things. Like, once I was in a bad situation in Afghanistan with some American soldiers, and we were about to get hit pretty hard. And one of the soldiers was like, listen, there's this big boulder, and there was a little space under the boulder where you could sort of crawl in and make yourself very small between the earth and the boulder, which is pretty inviting if you're about to get shot at. And the guy was like, listen, get in there. Nothing can hit you in there. And I was like, absolutely not. Like, can you imagine the spiders at the back of that hole? Like, I'll take my chances. So I got pretty good at tree work. I was fast. I loved doing it. It was felt like a macho job. I was paid a lot of money for it. It was absolutely thrilling. And one of the things I liked about it is that there was no random element. I mean, it scared me to be up there, but I would tell myself, and my dad was a physicist, so I think I saw it like this for that reason. I told myself, if you get killed doing this work, it will be because you made a mistake. You're just dealing with the laws of physics, right? If you top out a 100-foot white pine, when you top the tree like that out, you take off the last 20 feet or so. And, if you've judged it wrong and it comes back on you, you have a big problem because a ton of white pine wood is coming down on top of you when you're strapped to the tree, right? I mean, so that happens. A lot of bad things happen to climbers, but the bad things that happen to climbers almost invariably happen because the climber made a mistake, which meant the danger is in my control. And if I don't screw up, I'll be fine. And there was something about being able to control the outcome and that I was entirely responsible for what happened to me that A, was very reassuring, and B, it made me feel like I was dealing in some ways with something essential about existence. And I would be alive at the end of the day if I did everything right. And if I did something wrong, I might not be. And there was something, I'm not religious, so I look for things that seem to link me to a higher reality. And that seemed to do it. The complete responsibility I had for my own existence seemed to do that for me. And I absolutely loved it. But it means you can't make a mistake. And you all know that I'm about to tell you that I did make a mistake. So I just got tired and sloppy. And I was always scared of falling because we're hardwired to, fear heights. We're not hardwired to fear chainsaws. And so I got quite casual about my relationship with the chainsaw. And I hit the back of my leg and opened up the back of my leg up on a tree, on Cape Cod, actually, a big elm tree. And I could see my Achilles, but it didn't cut the Achilles. But of course, as soon as you hit your leg with the chainsaw, you're in shock, so it it didn't particularly hurt, and it wasn't particularly horrifying, but I remember I was hanging on the line 30, 40 feet up. I was like, oh no, my Achilles. And I made myself look at it. I was like, please tell me the Achilles. The Achilles. And I opened the wound up, and there it was. It looks about the thickness of a pencil, and it's sort of white, if you need to know. So anyway, I rappelled down, and my crew took me to the hospital. They sewed me up, and I came back to Gloucester, and I was, limping badly in a lot of pain, and I couldn't work, couldn't do much for, a month or two. And in the middle of this period where I'm really thinking, I'm 30 years old, I don't have a career to speak of, I'm limping around from a chainsaw wound, and what's happening? Like, my relationship was sort of falling apart. The prognosis didn't look good. I can pretty much tell you I could never have imagined being up here talking to you guys today. I can pretty much guarantee you that didn't seem very likely, right? And so I remember one afternoon, the wind started to sound kind of funny. And there were some phone lines outside the house, like everyone has phone lines outside their house. The phone lines outside our house started to sort of hum in this strange way. I was like, wow, I've never heard that before. And the wind just kept cranking and cranking and cranking, and the phone lines were just singing in this insane way, and sort of like a mad opera singer. And I said to Amy, something's going on out there, let's go check it out. And so she walked, I limped outside, and the oceans had just risen up. I mean, the Eastern Point Road was underwater down by that beach. I can't remember the name of that beach there. Yeah. And we limped all the way. I limped all the way out to the back shore and watched these. I mean, I'd never seen 30-foot waves before. These 30-foot seas coming in, just slow as freight trains coming into a train yard. I mean, just so slow and huge and heavy, and just exploding against the shore and against the houses. And it was an amazing thing to see. And to see the world in action, to see, some people would say God in action, either way, however you want to see it. It was absolutely awe-inspiring. And then the next day, I heard the tragic news about the Andrea Gale. 6 men on board, feared lost, 1,000 miles out at sea. And I couldn't imagine. I was like, I hope they're okay. Like, what must it have been like out there? And of course, they weren't okay. And they were lost to us. They were lost to this town. And I didn't know anyone in the fishing industry then. I had no personal connections to that story. But I had this thought, like, maybe I could write about dangerous work. I benefited from being from a pretty affluent family and being given a great education, right? So me, in the work that I did, I was sort of an exception. But I knew that most people in dangerous jobs they're often not that well paid, and they're hardworking people from hardworking towns like Gloucester, and they do things that the nation needs done. And we need firemen, we need police, we need soldiers, we need all kinds. But we also need fish to be caught. We need trees to be felled. We need oil to be drilled out of the ground. Like, we need all of these things done so that the nation can continue and can thrive. And those jobs kill people all the time. And they are, the people that are maimed and hurt and die in those professions are often not really thought about that much. And I thought, in the sort of grandiose way that desperate 30-year-olds have, I thought, I'm going to change that. I'm going to write a book about dangerous jobs. And I'm going to start by finding out everything I can find out about the Andrea Gale and this incredible storm that saw 105-foot wave heights offshore. 105 feet, my God. And it was an amazing rescue, and so I started researching it, and I was doing tree work. I mean, I didn't have a contract. I didn't even know anyone really in the publishing business, but I sort of went over to the Crow's Nest, which from the outside was a sort of intimidating place. And from the inside, it's not. I mean, once you're in there and talking to people, my God, what a fantastic place and what fantastic people. But if you're not a fisherman and you're not from Gloucester and you walk up those steps for the first time, it's a particular feeling. So, but I quickly made friends with Ethel Shatford and the amazing Shatford family. And, I was very aware, like, here I am, an outsider, a stranger, and I'm about to ask a woman about the loss of her son. And keep in mind, it's not just the death of her son. They never found him or anyone on the boat. And one of the terribly hard things about the fishing industry is that often you only finally, and this was particularly true, in the old days, you only finally conclude that the person died when they can't be found for weeks and months or years. Like you come to that conclusion slowly and painfully. They really were just simply lost to the world. And that's an extremely painful thing. And some part of you hangs on to the hope that by some miracle, and sadly most of the time there is no miracle. So this was the woman I want to ask about her son. And Ethel was just the most beautiful, fantastic person. And she, something about me, she trusted, she liked, and if she liked you, then everyone in the bar had to like you. And as far as how it seemed like it worked. And so people started coming up to me to tell me their stories about fishing. I researched and put together a 40, 50-page section. It was my first chapter in my book that I'd planned. It didn't really occur to me that I could sell this as a book. I mean, the boat disappeared. I didn't know what happened to it. How could I turn this into a 300-page book that was not fiction, right? I mean, I can imagine writing a novel. I'm not a good enough writer to, but somebody could. But how do you do this as journalism if you don't know what happened to the boat? So I wrote this 50-page section, and then I was like, okay, meanwhile, Amy and I broke up, and I'm like, on to the next, all right, logging. So I went out west and started hanging out with loggers and forest firefighters. Amazing guys out there. I mean, my God, those incredible worlds out there that I was inviting myself into. And people, for the most part, were pretty welcoming. I mean, I got out there to a forest fire, and the Forest Service guy was like, well, we have a helicopter going out to this 300,000 acre fire in Idaho. Like, we have a helicopter going out there in an hour. Why don't you just jump on? And I'm like, really? It's that easy? Like, I can just get on your government helicopter and suddenly I'm in a forest fire? So I just couldn't believe that these worlds were opening up to me. And so I wrote a book proposal, and on the basis of this 50-page section, and I went off to this sort of final thing I wanted to research, which was war reporting. And my father was a refugee from 2 wars. He was born in Dresden. His father was a journalist. His father was Jewish. After the Reichstag fire, they left Germany, fearing what was coming, knowing maybe what was coming. And they went to Spain. His father was part Spanish. They went to Spain, amazing, beautiful country, and to Madrid. And then the fascists came in. Franco came in 1936. And there was an election. The progressives won and trounced the conservatives. And Franco said, the fact that they won proves that it was rigged, so we have to throw them out by any means necessary. And he convinced the military to go along with this, and they swept into power, and there was a brutal 3-year war. So my father's family fled. He was 13. They went to France. Well, you know how that went a couple of years later. And he wound up in this country and became a physicist and did amazing work for this country and for our government. So I was very interested in war because of its effect on my family. And there was a war in Bosnia, in Sarajevo. The city of Sarajevo was besieged. And I wanted to know, like, what was that? What's that like? And, I grew up in comfort and safety, and part of me felt like, wow, you've never confronted anything where you didn't know what the outcome would be, right? I mean, I've never faced real fear. I have never really faced the unknown. And here's a city where all 300-some thousand people are facing the unknown together. That sounded compelling. It sounded like a place I wanted to be. And any community under stress, under duress, under threat bonds together like that. Communities bond from hardship. They bond from grief. This community has done that many times. And in Sarajevo, the situation could not be starker. They were besieged by a modern army that was shelling them and shooting at them day in, day out. 1 out of 5 people in that city were killed or wounded. Men, women, children, everybody. And I went there, and by some incredible luck, through my father, he knew someone who knew an agent who was just starting out, and this guy, Stuart, was like, okay, I'll try to sell your book proposal. And I was like, good luck with that. Like, that's not happening. I'm going to Bosnia. If someone's willing to buy this, let me know, but otherwise, see you in a while. So I went off to Sarajevo, and I found this place that was like, all of a sudden, here was this sort of feeling of community that I'd sort of longed for my whole life. Like, if you want to create community, threaten a city with danger, right? You want to watch people band together no matter what they think, who they are, what they believe. You want to see them band together, threaten it. You can see it happening in Ukraine right now. And, yeah. It's a very, very powerful reaction, and we all understand it. We all know it, and it's interesting because only the very unfortunate get to experience it. And it's one of the weird ironies of our lives in this quite affluent country. So suddenly there I was in Sarajevo, and I was like, oh, this is one huge tribe. They're fighting off a modern army. There's teenage boys with shotguns in the trenches. This is amazing, and heartbreaking. I mean, it was everything. It was absolutely, war is everything. It's every human feeling, every human experience, times 1,000. It's easy to love, it's easy to hate, it's easy to fear, and eventually, if you cover war long enough, and this is how you know you've covered it long enough, eventually, the only feeling you can really have about it is incredibly sad. But it takes a while to get there because it's so many other things also, but eventually it's just unbelievably sad. And I finally got there. It took quite a while. But so there I was in Sarajevo thinking, I want to stay. I don't want to, and my agent faxed to me. Remember fax machines? My agent faxed me and said, I sold your book. You're not going to get rich off it, but someone will publish it. You've got to come home. So I felt like my mother was calling me home for dinner, right? So I came home, and I just started working, and I was living on Cape Cod, and I would do a tree job in Boston, and then I'd show up in Gloucester covered in sawdust, and first when I was in Gloucester, I'd spend the night upstairs at the Crow's Nest, and I'd be there at the bar, covered in sawdust with a notebook, and people gradually at least trusted me, and I think some liked me, and I sort of became part of the community a little bit. And I turned in I finally, after 3 years, the book was 2 years late, right? Like, I think I probably made about $1 an hour writing it from the advance, right? I mean, it was a labor of love. But at any rate, so I kept doing tree work, and I eventually moved to New York, and I turned the book in back when turning a book in meant that you took the subway to your publishing company and went up to the 6th floor on the elevator and gave him or her a big stack of paper. Like, I turned my book in, and the next day, and what I really wanted to be was a war reporter. And so the next day, finally, I was like, the next day I flew to Afghanistan. It was 1996, and there was my first international magazine assignment. I watched the Taliban starting. They'd already taken over half the country. They were right on the outskirts of Kabul. In fact, we got shot at by a Taliban machine gunner right on the outskirts of Kabul. In Jalalabad, I watched the Taliban emissaries, these 12 like bearded, scowling older men. They were staying at the same hotel I was, right? I was the only Westerner in town, and then there was the Taliban. And so we would sort of look at each other across the room, and, I don't think they thought for a second that I was a journalist. I think they assumed I was CIA or something. And I just remember getting sort of irked, like, what are you frowning for so much? Like, come on, like, lighten up. Like, this is what you look so, you also look so grim. Like, so that was that. They were negotiating the fall of Jalalabad. They took over by not so much by fighting, but by negotiating, paying off, extorting, threatening, and I just kept covering wars. And eventually, my book came out, and I was sort of torn. I wanted to be a war reporter, but then suddenly my book was doing way better than I expected. And in some ways, it was doing better than I wanted it to. I mean, I was really on this war reporter track, and all of a sudden, I was like an author. And I was on book tours, going around and around the country. And I remember, book tours they're wonderful. You're very lucky to be able to do them if you get to do them as an author. But they're also really exhausting. I mean, it's a different city every night, a different event every night. You're up at 5 in the morning to do morning radio. You go to the airport, you fly to another city, and you do that, for 6 straight weeks, and it's pretty brutal. And I finally finished my book tour, and I remember, and the book was selling like crazy. I remember the head of PR for the publisher was like, "Okay, well done. We've sold tons of books. How about a victory lap?" And I was like, "I'm not taking a victory lap around the country. I'm exhausted." But I was still, when the book came out, I was still doing tree work, where I was living in I was living in a one-bedroom. Or no, not even. It was a studio apartment in New York City in the Lower East Side, near where I still live with my family, and I had a couple of chainsaws in there, my climbing gear. I had a pickup truck. And 2 days a week I'd drive north out of the city. I was working for this tree company, climbing for them a couple of days a week, and the money was nice, and it just kept me kind of centered. And then the book came out, and this was before cell phones, so I'm there, like at a payphone. I checked my, remember back when you would have like a voicemail service, and you'd call and you punch in the code and you get your voicemail. Like, I would do that. And then I'd call back the ABC producer or whatever and say, yes, I think I can, and it was crazy. And eventually the book was on the bestseller list, and I was totally thrilling ride, but very intimidating. And I eventually got used to public speaking. That was actually quite, what I'm doing right now, and I feel quite comfortable. I really enjoy talking to you guys. It took about 20 years to figure out how to do that. There was a job, we had a job in Poughkeepsie, and this lady needed a tree taken down, and we showed up, and I got up into the tree. It was a big dead locust, and this was like a mom. Her husband was at work, I think, and her kids were at school, whatever. Nice lady. I took the tree down, come finish, stump it, and she comes out to thank me, and I'm covered in sawdust as usual, and she's just peering at me, right? And she said, "Has anyone ever told you it's amazing how much you look like this author, Sebastian Junger?" He said, I'm reading his book right now. It's a great book. It's on my bedside table. And I was like, I don't know how to tell you this, but that's actually me. And I still don't know if she believed me or not. Like, so I'm going to check I don't want to overrun the clock here. I'm going to see how we're doing for time. Oh, wow. I just used up half an hour without even knowing it. So I want to leave time. I'm going to speak for a little bit longer, sort of finish out my story here. But I want to leave time for questions. Afghanistan was a country I really loved. It was a beautiful country. I was there in 2000. I was with Ahmad Shah Massoud as he fought the Taliban and the Northern Alliance in the north in Badakhshan. It was a very, very rough trip. He was basically encircled. We went in there by helicopter, and it was a very hard trip. We saw some very hard things, very painful things, incredible amount of suffering, ghastly amount of suffering. We were in a lot of danger. We were shelled so badly once by Katyusha rockets with that our horse was killed. Like the horse couldn't get down, and we could, and our pack horse was killed. It was brutal. And I got back to the United States, and I had what I later found out was called PTSD. All I knew was that at age 38, I seemed to finally be going crazy. I had a panic disorder. I couldn't take the subway. I mean, it was just too many people. The lights were too bright. Everything was too loud. The trains were going too fast. Everything was too much, and everything seemed like it was going to kill me, even though I knew it wasn't. It all seemed everything seemed like a mortal threat, and I could not take the subway for a while. And eventually went away, but one of the really lasting consequences of being a war reporter, I've been, I would say, almost killed 3 or 4 times, maybe. It's a hard thing to quantify. Like if a bullet hits here, is that almost killed or not? I mean, well, but if it hits here, it might as well have hit 10 yards away, right? I mean, it's all sort of all or nothing. So is this close or not close? I mean, I don't know. At any rate, I'm counting that as one of the times, right? So indulge me. But what really changes you psychologically, what really leaves a scar, and it should leave a scar, some scars are good, some scars are necessary, is seeing the suffering of others. And that is not something one recovers from completely. And I saw that in Afghanistan, I saw it in Liberia, I was all over West Africa and the civil wars in West Africa. And those things, not the threats to my safety, the close calls, that ultimately make sort of good stories later. You know, what do not make good stories later, the things that there is nothing good about is when you see harm come to others. And, you know, even now I can feel the emotion rising in my chest, even saying that. And that, at the end of the day, war, like I said, it's exciting, it's scary, it's crazy, it's elemental, it's ancient, it's, you know, people act very lovingly in war, they act very badly, they're very selfless and heroic, they're cowardly, it's everything, right? But eventually, at the end of the day, you understand it's incredibly sad. And I finally got to that place when my friend Tim was killed. Tim and I had been off and on, spent a year off and on at a remote American outpost in Afghanistan, an outpost called Restrepo. And it was a position that had 20 or 30 American soldiers. There was no internet, there was no electricity for a while, there was certainly no running water, there was no cooked food, there was no communication with the rest of the world, except the company headquarters by radio. And those guys were in sometimes 4 or 5 firefights a day. And Tim and I were out there off and on for a year. I got blown up. Tim broke his leg in combat and had to walk down an entire mountain, a 12,000-foot mountain, on a broken leg, because to do otherwise would have jeopardized the guys he was with. They were going to get hit, and they couldn't stay where they were. And Tim took 3 Advil and sucked it up. And so we had video cameras, and we shot a lot of footage, and we were great friends, brothers, colleagues, everything to each other out there. And we made this documentary called Restrepo. And everyone in the business was like, no one's interested in a documentary about the war. I mean, we were basically told to get lost over and over again. And we'd risked our lives to do this. So I'm like, okay, if we're going to risk our lives, it follows that we would risk our finances, right? I mean, if you're going to risk your life and not your finances, what'd you risk your life for, right? So Tim and I both, no one would buy the film, so we made it ourselves, basically emptied our piggy banks, and made this film. And all of a sudden, I mean, it was a little bit like The Perfect Storm. It just sort of caught fire. And it's about a tragedy. You know, it's hard to feel happy that something you did is successful when the thing that you did is about someone else's loss. Like, how do you celebrate that, right? It's complicated. And So, but at any rate, we won a lot of awards, and I think we made a lot of people think about the war. And I don't mean think like, oh, so they condemn it or they sell it. Just think about it. Just think about what war is. Like I said, it's a lot of good things, it's a lot of bad things, it's everything. And the film sort of showed that. One of the interesting things about these young men that we were with, it was all men out there in the unit we were with, and also about Tim and myself, is that we all missed it afterwards. We really missed it out there. And I think ultimately, at the end of the day, what we missed was the experience of closeness in a situation that was that extreme. You get very close to people. And then you come back to this country, and this is an amazing, beautiful country. But we don't need to have closeness because we're not depending on each other for survival in immediate terms. And there's a real loss there. There's a real liberation there, too. But there's also a real loss. And so the film was nominated for an Oscar, and we went to the red carpet. We were on the red carpet and with a bunch of soldiers and their girlfriends, and it was an amazing time. Guys from the platoon and their girlfriends and wives. And we didn't win, but it was an extraordinary time, and Tim and I were supposed to go on assignment to Libya a few weeks later to cover the Arab Spring. The world was aboil. We were journalists. We had to get, surf's up. We got to get out there, like this, basically. And at the last moment, I couldn't go, personal reasons. And Tim went, and the last email I got from him, he said, I'm going to take a boat to the city of Misrata, which is besieged by Gaddafi's forces. I'm going with a few other journalists. I'm only going to be there a few days. I think it's okay. And I wrote him back, and I was like, listen, man, that sounds really dangerous. Be really careful. If they overrun that city, there's no way out. Gaddafi's got an air force. The boats aren't going to fishing boats aren't going to get out. Like they're going to say you're a spy. You know what happens to spies. Like, just be careful. And the next morning after he got there, a mortar, 81 millimeter mortar, impacted near him and some other journalists and fighters, and he took some shrapnel in the groin, just hit his femoral artery, and he bled out in the back of a rebel pickup truck racing for the Misrata hospital. And for a number of reasons, but mostly just pure grief and sorrow and having just simply had enough of that aspect of humanity. I stopped war reporting and continued on to write some very, 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 very gratifying books about human connection, not about human destruction, human connection. My book, Tribe, was a direct result of those experiences I had. And I went on to be lucky enough to be in an amazing marriage to an amazing woman and to have two little girls, age 5 and age 2.5. They are at the Beauport Hotel right now, and with the babysitter. And thank you to her and her family as well. And I got to say, I didn't know my life was leading to this, and at times I despaired of having a family. I wanted to very badly, and I just somehow didn't seem to ever be able to pull it off. And I now realize my whole life was headed towards this, and I'm the happiest I've ever been in my life, and I might even be the happiest person I know other than my wife and daughters. So. Thank you. So I've gone way past the 30 minutes that I promised to talk. I will take questions for as long as you guys want to ask them or until someone pulls the plug on us. There is a microphone being passed around. Yeah, there's a guy right there.
We happen to be related. This wasn't planned.
Thank you, Izzy, my niece. Sebastian, Barry, Pat, I don't know if you remember, but as we were getting ready to put the movie premiere on, you and I sat up in my office at Tally's at the time on 2 different occasions, and we talked about, what your thoughts were and what you wanted to do for this community. Earlier tonight, you said that you wanted to thank the community. Obviously, the city of Gloucester thanks you for putting Gloucester back on the map, but more importantly, on a personal level, when Warner Brothers decided to go in a different direction from the Perfect Storm Foundation, and I had the discussions with you, we decided to put on the world premiere and the celebration, and we formed the Gloucester Fund. And you had asked to support the surviving children. Well, in the couple of years that followed the world premiere, we were lucky enough to assist Billy Tyne's 2 daughters to get through college, one of whom is now a principal in a school. One is now a nurse that runs a ward in a hospital. We were able to help even John Smith, the New York Air National Guard parajumper that died.
Yeah.
His wife, Marianne, married Marianne Smith Stahl. She had 3 daughters. We were able to help put them through college, including 2 of the daughters that went and served in the same New York Air National Guard unit as their father, and went and served in Afghanistan.
Wow.
We were able to help Bobby Shapford and Lisa's 2 sons with their education, and I'm still in touch and actually trying to get in touch this week actually with Dale Murphy's kids, etc. Dale Murphy's son, Dale Junger. And so from the families of the Andrea Gale, thank you for all your help.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. You're celebrating yourselves as you should. You guys made that happen. It's amazing. Amazing.
Gloucester people like to talk. Come on. Anybody?
Yeah, come on. I'll start picking on people if someone doesn't raise their hand.
Hold it like this.
I heard, could you tell us about Pulse? You knew that you worked.
Oh, Pulse, yeah. So I'm working on a book that I think will be called Pulse. So I've been in many dangerous situations. I've been quite scared many times. But I was not prepared for something that happened to me just about 2 years ago. I'm in good health. I run a lot. My pulse is 50-something, whatever. I just don't think about my health because it's never really a problem. So as a result, I don't think about my mortality or whatever because I just don't think about it. And so I had an undiagnosed asymptomatic aneurysm in my pancreatic artery. And it was the result of a sort of congenital abnormality in my abdomen. I have a ligament that's in the wrong place. It sort of crushed the celiac artery, which is basically a garden hose of blood. If you force that much blood to detour, it creates very high pressures in the smaller arteries. And one of those small arteries developed an aneurysm, which I think probably most of you know what that is. It's very dangerous ballooning of an artery. And they're deadly because they're asymptomatic, often asymptomatic. And it ruptured almost 2 years ago. Out of the blue, just like I'm talking to you now, I just felt a sudden pain shoot through my abdomen. And within a minute, I had a hard time standing up because my blood pressure was plummeting. I was bleeding out into my abdominal cavity. Barbara, my wife, she dragged me. We own a property on Cape Cod, and we were sort of deep in the woods, and we were even deeper into the woods near the house. She dragged me out of the woods and found one bar of cell phone signal and called 911. It's a very remote little property, and called the ambulance, and they came, and by the time they got there, I was going blind. Because if your hemoglobin drops too much, you can't, it affects everything. And I was actively dying. And they put me in the ambulance at Barbara's insistence, And I was like, I don't know, maybe I'm okay. I mean, I'm just feeling a little. And those guys were also like, yeah, maybe you'll be all right. And I've read a statistic that married men live longer. And I like this. This is why, right? This is why, because when you're bleeding out into your abdomen, your wife will insist that you go to the ER. Studies have shown, like, she will actually insist. So off I went. It took 45 minutes to get me. It took me an hour and a half to get to medical care. And by the time I got there, I'd gone into compensatory shock, which will hold you together for a while. And as soon as I pulled into the ER, my whole system just let go. And I was actively dying and would have been dead in probably 10 minutes, but for their intervention. And they cut my neck open and put a line into my jugular to put 10 units of blood in me. My blood pressure was 60/40, which is pretty low. And I was still conversant with the doctor. And he said to me, he asked for permission to put a large gauge needle in my jugular, which is awfully polite of him. And I said, you mean in case there's an emergency? And everyone looked at each other like, oh, okay, one of these guys. Yeah. But here's the sort of puzzling thing. Well, first of all, these things are usually deadly. I got very lucky to have the medical care that I had, that I was strong and healthy, that I gave them something to work with. It took them another 8 hours, but they finally managed to find the leak and embolize it and stabilize me. But here's the odd thing. And so I said my father's a physicist. He died about 10 years ago. He was an impossibly rational man. And just ask my mother. I mean, he was just like, if you can't measure it and you can't prove it or disprove it, I don't believe it. Like that. I mean, he really was one of those guys. And I sort of wound up with a bit of that. Not a bit of it. I wound up being exactly like him. And so he was an atheist. He was not religious. I'm not religious. Agnostic, atheist. But in those moments when I was on the threshold, two things happened. A black pit opened up underneath me, and I started to get pulled into it. And I had no idea I was dying, but I did not. I mean, no one wants to go into a black pit, right? I mean, that just instinctively, I did not want to go. I just knew, do not go in the black pit. And I was getting pulled in. And I said to the doctor, you've got to hurry, you're losing me right now, I'm going. And as I said that, my dead father appeared above me with his arms spread like that to welcome me. And I wanted nothing to do with him. I wanted nothing to do with him or his pit, right? I mean, I was just like, Dad, I love you, but not now. Like, I'm going to go this way. And no, I was really aversive to him. And I loved him. But I was like, no, I want nothing to say to you. And they put 10 units in me. I barely made it, but I made it. And the next morning, the ICU, I woke up throwing up blood, and I was a mess. But I was alive. And the nurse came in and asked how I was doing. I was like, well, not very well. And she said, well, you're actually doing quite well, because you almost died yesterday. Like, in fact, no one can believe you're alive. That's how much you almost died yesterday. And it's a shocking thing to be told, right? I mean, I was like, what? Yesterday I almost died? Are you kidding? And I had no idea. And then she left the room to continue her rounds. And what? No counseling? And so, so she came back. She came back like an hour later and said, how you doing? And she had a good local accent going, and how you doing? And I said, well, frankly, not that well. I mean, I'm really sort of traumatized by what you told me. Like, I'm terrified. Like, I can't believe I almost died in my own driveway. It's terrifying. And super pragmatic woman, right? And nuts and bolts, right? And she said, well, honey, instead of thinking about it as something scary, try thinking about it as something sacred. And which is a hell of a thing to tell an atheist who almost died. And but I've been thinking about it ever since. And you know what? You don't have to be religious or not religious to understand the power, the profundity of the threshold between life and death, right? And I was taken to that threshold, and I looked over the edge. I saw someone I love who is dead, and I was allowed to come back. And it was an extreme. Anytime you go to a front line, you might get killed, right? You just know that. What happened to me in Hyannis, Massachusetts, was an extreme version, a very personal version of going. It was another front line, and my whole life I've been going to front lines and coming back and telling people what I learned, what's going on out there, why is that happening, what's happening, and so it allowed me to turn it around in my mind, and I thought, that was terrifying. I wish it hadn't happened. I can't even think about my daughters in the context of that, right? They almost lost their dad. But what did I learn? Did I learn anything of value? I'm not interested particularly in the supernatural, but my experience was quite common. It's weirdly common. They're called NDEs, near-death experiences. Many people who almost die are welcomed by the dead. And the lucky ones return to life. And that happened to me, and it's got me really quite curious. And it got me thinking about, and I'll end it. Sorry, it's a long answer, but it was a long story. It got me thinking about whether you're religious or not, death eradicates the individual. It's the ultimate insult to the individual. You're done, right? And it's what gives our brief lives meaning. They'd have less meaning if they went on forever, right? It's what gives them meaning. But it's also, what a crime, right? Why? How is that possible? Why is that possible? It made me think about, so what is how must we live in the face of that? How do you live? What's the thing you must concentrate on as you lead your life? And what I've come up with, which it works for whether you're religious or not, is you must support human dignity. At the end of the day, our lives must be about protecting the human dignity of all of us. And so that just begs the question, so what do you mean by human dignity? And you don't want to resort to, when you see it, which you do, actually, but that's not, if you're going to, claim to write about this, you can't leave it at that. And so what I finally, it came to me just the other day, a couple of days ago, and I don't know, I just think about things, and things come to me sometimes. What came to me the other day is human dignity. Breaches of human dignity are when people are treated as if they were disposable, right? The poor, the people who have been exploited in factories around the world, textile mills 100 years ago in this country, soldiers, civilians who were killed. Do you think Putin, what's your guess? Do you think Putin thinks his soldiers are disposable? Yeah. It's a breach of human dignity. Not to mention the civilians, right? But even his own soldiers. That idea of disposability is what we must all fight against, because that really, look, the universe is going to eradicate us soon enough. Let's not collaborate on that project. Let's fight against it while we're here. That's what I learned when that nurse said, something sacred happened to you. That's where I finally come back from that threshold from, is like, It's human dignity is all of our fight, and we all know what we mean by that. Thank you. Thank you.
So we have one more question for the night over here.
One more question. Yes, sir.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us this evening and sharing those very personal anecdotes and how they connect. I'm humbled because I served 26 years, active duty, Army, infantry, multiple deployments. And sir, you have a very large fan base, both in the Army infantry and in the service and in the veteran community. So my hat's off to your leadership in what you started with, how perfectly you captured what happened on that FOB with the 503rd and with the Strepo, and then with war, and then with tribe. So that's just a preface, but I do have a question that goes to the thesis of tribe and how the post 9/11 generation of service members, and both men and women, they've had a difficult time with transition because of the division of the community that they come home to. And you pointed out that there was an opportunity for us to maybe embrace a cultural connection to shedding the combat spirit and experience before they come back and re-enter into the community. But that research and that book that you shared with us was 2017, 2018, and now we're 3.5, 4 years later. My question is, from that time frame to now, if we are as divided as we were then, if not even more so, what do you tell someone who's trying to continue to transition in such a divided community? And what do I tell my brothers and sisters, those that I commanded, how they can not turn angry and vitriol on social media and become productive and retransition into their community? So I would ask you for saying that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'm glad you guys saved the easy question for last. Boy, you guys don't want to stay up late enough for me to really answer that question fully. But I'll say this: the divisions in our country, and we all know what I'm talking about. They affect everybody. It's not just veterans. Veterans are, on occasion, can be a vulnerable part of the population, not the only vulnerable part of the population. But they affect all of us. And those divisions, I mean, there are terrifying political divisions now that are way more of a threat to this democracy and this country than Russia ever was, that any Al-Qaeda ever was, right? Bullets aren't going to take this country down. We're just too powerful and we're too good at what we do. Words will. Words will take us down. And my father grew up dealing with fascism, right? I mean, that process of taking over a society and taking over it with anger and division it works over and over again. It doesn't work for very long, right? But those kinds of governments fail pretty quickly, but they leave destroyed countries in their wake. So I don't know what the answer to that is, other than that veterans have enormous moral authority. And if veterans stand up and say to members of both parties, and both parties transgress, say to members of both parties, how dare you insult our fellow Americans? That person, that person you insulted might look differently than me, might vote differently than me. In fact, we might argue all night long if we, had a chance to, but how dare you? Like, we're all Americans here, and we are going to thrive together or we'll die together, right? And it's our choice. This country cannot survive as a political entity, as an economy, as a cultural entity, and as so far the longest experiment in democracy. It cannot survive the rhetoric that we've been sort of being poached in, boiled in for the last years. All right, so veterans have a moral voice that they can use, and it should be nonpartisan, right? Like, I'm not arguing you should be Republican or Democrat. It doesn't matter to me, but you must be pro-democratic. You must be pro-democracy, and that means respecting everyone else in this country. No one is disposable. Nobody, and. Thank you. And so when Hillary Clinton refers to the deplorables, there's a hint of, well, they're kind of disposable people. And Donald Trump has said that kind of nonsense many times himself, right? So that's what I'm talking about. But I'll end with this, that we live in this, we are blessed, right? And I, as an atheist, I have no problem using that word. It's a powerful word. I love that word. We are blessed. We're extremely fortunate to live in this society, and for so many different ways. And what's striking about it, what's so odd about it, for such a wealthy, safe, amazing, culturally rich, stunning society, we have some of the highest rates of addiction and suicide and depression and anxiety in the world ever, right? Our teenagers are dying, killing themselves at a ghastly rate. I mean, it's appalling, right? And it's because our society is fragmented and alienated in a way that I think only a very wealthy society can be. So how do we, I think the sort of moonshot project for me, for the next generation, is how do we maintain the advantages of our amazing wealth and knowledge and technological ability and everything else? How do we maintain that and make society more cohesive and human? Like, if we can do that, we will have truly landed on the moon. And I know we can, but we have to decide to do it. Thank you, everyone. Such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
On behalf of the 400th Committee in the City of Gloucester, we really want to thank you for making this journey to Gloucester. You have no idea how much you mean to our city and to all of us. And this is a gift for you and your family.
Oh, thank you.
And this, and this.
Oh, thank you so much. You guys are so sweet. So sweet.